Okay, good morning, everyone. How we doing? Doing good? Okay, so I'd like to discuss the last paragraph of this week's Torah reading, and that is page 633, or if you're looking at another Chumash, it's Numbers 15, verse 37. And this is a passage that will be familiar to us because it is in the daily prayers. We say it twice or three times a day. It's the third paragraph of the Shema. And the rabbis discuss why is it that this passage is included in the Shema? Why is it such a centrally important text that it should be meditated upon every day? Right? The whole Torah is filled with many important teachings. Do you have ideas about why that might be? When you look at this, do you see something significant about this teaching? It's again chapter 15, verse 37 through 41.
It's the tzitzit.
It does refer to the tzitzit, yes.
The tzitzit is something about the senses, to see it, to wear it, to feel it, to remember. Something has to do with your eyes. What you see is what your heart will wish for, things that are not allowed to. Uses a lot of senses.
So the idea of the tzitzis activating the senses.
Yes.
Okay.
And it makes us remember. That we have
Remembering
to be holy.
God.
Yes, we have to be holy.
Mm-hmm.
And it also says that here.
What? Be
My
holy.
commandment to be holy
Yes.
unto your God. I
Yes.
am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. So it's
What is unique about this? So I think that the idea of being holy unto God is a theme that recurs throughout the Bible, throughout the Torah. And I don't know that this is a unique teaching here. Is there anything specifically unique about this besides the tzitzis?
It also reminds us of coming out of Egypt.
Coming out of Egypt?
Yes.
but that's also in it. So
And it makes a connection between them all.
Oh, the connection between them all.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a circle and makes a package.
So this is the teaching. Actually, Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha teaches this. It might be said that it's it's Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha's teaching. Parshas Tzitzis. Why is it in the Shema? He says there. I'm sorry, it's not Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha. Rabbi Yehuda bar Chaviva. There are 6 ideas contained in this passage. 6 themes referred to. 6 themes. Okay, so let's see them one after another. See if you could find them. So the easy one is the mitzvah of tzitzis, right? That's easy. That's repeated throughout the passage. The second one is the exodus from Egypt, Yetzias Mitzrayim. The third one is the yoke of mitzvahs, the obligation to follow God's commandments. Yes, we see that one?
I remember
Number 4, the prohibition against denying the existence of God. That we should not deny the existence of God. So that would be
Which one is it?
verse 41. Ani Hashem Elokechem.
Right.
I'm the Lord your God. Right? So that declares the existence of God. So this is to rule out the opposite of that. The idea of avoiding the thoughts of temptation. Right? We see this one?
Yes.
Where is it?
Tech,
Right. 30, 39. Do not follow your eyes and go astray after them. And finally, the thoughts of idol worship. And that also is in verse 39. Do not follow your hearts and do not follow your eyes, that you stray after them. The straying refers to idol worship. Actually, this text, Lo taturu achrei levavechem v'achrei einechem, do not follow, do not go out after your heart and your eyes, is classically in modern day and age taught regarding the idea of morality and not being inappropriately lustful. But there is another lesser known interpretation, which is actually brought by Rambam as the meaning of this text is not to follow idol worship.
Isn't this referring also to some of the Ten Commandments directly?
Where?
All these commandments.
All these commandments, well, that refers, it's not in the context of the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments is far away. So the mitzvot in general.
Yes. It is there's one God.
Yeah. Oh, I see. You're seeing this theme, the one God taking us out of Egypt, the idea of morality.
Right.
That there is perhaps we can identify the thread that runs between these six things. We could identify them in the Ten Commandments as well. But it's an interesting thought. I want to point out first of all the six things. Right? Let's go over them again. Mitzvah of tzitzit, the exodus from Egypt, the yoke, the obligation to fulfill God's commandments, not to deny the existence of God, not to entertain thoughts of sin, and not to entertain thoughts of idol worship. Okay? There are 3 thou shalts and 3 thou shalt nots. 3 positive, 3 negative. And it occurs to me that the 3 are mirror images of each other. And by the way, this is a feature also in the Ten Commandments. That they are these, so essentially there are 3 general principles in this passage. Each one has its positive and negative side. Let's start from the most abstract to the most tangible. The existence of God, knowledge of the existence of God, which relates to the mitzvah of the yoke of mitzvahs, the prohibition against entertaining thoughts of idol worship, and the exodus, the mitzvah of tzitzis, and the exodus from Egypt, and not entertaining thoughts of sin. So I think that these 6 principles are primary ideas that help us to live, that help to set us straight on the right path in our daily Jewish life and our daily religious and spiritual life. The first principle is to know that there is a God, and to know that my life is directed, is in the context of the presence of God. And for this, I have the mitzvah of tzitzis, which it contains on it the blue thread. And the blue thread is meant to direct my attention to the sky, to the other, to that which is beyond the realm of my experience. But the rabbis put it in a very interesting way. They say the blue on the tzitzis is similar to the blue on the ocean. And the blue in the ocean is similar to the blue in the sky. And then beyond that, the blue in the sky is similar to the color of the sapphire, which is under the throne of God. So the idea is that how do we know that God exists? Look at the strings in your hand and see them in their greater context. Don't just look at them. Allow your mind to look beyond them and through them. Look through them and beyond them, I should say. And in so doing, you could experience the presence of God. And this is true even for people, for women who don't wear tzitzis, that we have women perhaps have more opportunities to see the existence of God, living closer to nature, and therefore experiencing the hand of God in your life in a way that is different than stereotypically than what is masculine living, which is not so much navigating through nature, but cultivating nature is a different masculine way of being, is taking nature and changing it, whereas women, the feminine existence is one that is more subject to flowing through nature. And we could talk about that at length, but that would just be a take time. You think about it. If it rings true for you, good. And the second is the Exodus from Egypt. The Exodus from Egypt says that it really says two things. It says that my life is that I'm not a slave anymore. I am not subject to my circumstances. A slave, somebody else runs his life. And very, very critical for the idea of not entertaining the thoughts of sin is that a person is able to say, I am the master of my own destiny. Obviously, it doesn't contradict the idea that God is in my life, but it says that I am free. I have the ability to make choices. A slave doesn't have the ability to make choices. And so where a person may have thoughts of sin, that's okay. Let them go. They don't mean anything. They don't have to mean anything. They don't have to go beyond the momentary thought. And that relates to the Exodus from Egypt and the idea of contemplating thoughts of sin. And finally, the yoke of mitzvahs, the obligation to follow God's commandment and the prohibition against considering idol worship, which says that my life is to be dedicated to the service of God, that I can act, that my worship, my life is a worship of God and not of others. Right? We differentiate between apikursus, which says classically means the denial of the existence of God, and idol worship. The two would seemingly be the same thing. The answer is no. One talks about foreign worship. First of all, a person could believe in the existence of God and still think that there is an additional God that they should also worship. There's also the idea that there are two separate things. One is theological and the other is religious. The theophilosophical idea that God exists doesn't say anything about what that means in my day-to-day life. I worship. And therefore I have all mitzvahs, the yoke, the obligation to fulfill commandments of God and the prohibition against worshiping anything other than God. And that's a religious statement. That's a lifestyle statement rather than a theological or philosophical one.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, which one is better from the two? Uh, from the two, being an atheist, Apikoros, or worshiping the stars, or being idol worshiper.
Which is worse?
Yeah, I think being an Apikoros.
Perhaps. So you're saying that
at least you believe in something.
yes. So it's easy. So you're saying that a person who doesn't have the philosophical grounding to be aware that God exists is worse than somebody who is worshiping idols. I would add to that a person who's worshiping idols can channel their worshipfulness to other ends, but a person who doesn't have the idea of worshipfulness at all is missing something fundamental. I would also point to the idea of apikoros is a Hebraization of the Greek Epicureanism. Epicureans denied, they didn't have the idea of the duality.
Of what?
Of the duality. They didn't believe in the existence of a spirit that transcends the body, which is why we talk about Epicurean delights, gourmet, right? We call Epicurean delights our foods, So this goes back again to the idea of the Epicurean. What is the answer to the Epicureans who say there is no God, there is no spiritual life beyond the physical, is the mitzvah of tzitzit, which says, actually, look into your body, look through the physical existence and perceive the world beyond it. Which is, in a way, it's even a criticism of the Aristotelian duality, which says that there are two separate dimensions, the spirit and the body. This says, no, the tzitzis itself, the ocean itself, is a symbol of the heaven. The strings in your hand are a symbol of the ocean, and the ocean in your hand, and the ocean is a symbol of the heaven, and the heaven should draw your mind to the transcendent. And that, in the Jewish idea, says that by the physical experience, we can perceive the existence of the divine. And that we should understand that just as the physical existence has the human condition contains with it a spiritual awareness. So to use the Talmudic phraseology, Ma haneshama mamaleas haguf kacha Chodosh Baruch Hu mamaleas haolam. Just as the soul fills the body, so too does the Holy Blessed One fill the world. But I see in that both a reference to the actual life force in the body, which is the obvious reading of that text, but also beyond that to the aspirational and the creative and the spiritual tendencies that exist in the meat and bones of the human being. And that we could recognize that by looking at that very fusion, that we should be able to perceive that same spiritual quality can exist in all of the physical existence. So we look at what is in our own hands, and we can see that there is more to the world than meets the eye. Yeah? This is, in a sense, the conclusion of the story of the spies.
Of the what?
of the spies that we also read of in our parsha, who rejected the idea of going into the land of Israel. Sorry, rejected going to the land of Israel. They saw the land, they saw the giants, and they couldn't conceive of how it would be conquerable. And perhaps it could be said that these 3/6 principles would be corrective in their mistake.
Why? What was their mistake? The spies.
What was their mistake?
I don't know. I'm just glancing at some of the explanation here, and it sounds like they're guilty of something.
Well, what happened?
That they're evil. There's an evil.
Yeah. So evil, by the way, I want to say a side note. The word evil in Jewish thought and the word evil in the English language are not the same. Ra in Hebrew translates as, I would say, the English word evil is associated with malevolence. Malevolence, which means conscious and intentional dastardly acts. Right? Somebody who is vicious is evil. In Judaism, we find the word Ra, which we generally translate as evil, used in many contexts that don't imply malevolence and viciousness. And it seems that exactly the word Ra is more about negativity than about malevolence, which means, in a sense, inaction is Ra. Death is Ra. There's nothing malevolent about death. It's a reality. There's nothing vicious about death. Right? We see, I place before you as Achayim v'Satov, life and good, and Maves and Ra, and death and evil. Right? So how do you associate those things? Right? We're all going to die. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Right? So are we all destined to evil, to malevolence? No. The answer is that in life it's a binary. There are always two options. We are either constructive or we are not constructive. When we are constructive, we are acting with positive intent. We're improving ourselves and our surroundings. When we are not, we are slaves of our circumstance. Inaction. So there can be many motivations about that, but ultimately it is futility, uselessness, which the maximum manifestation of futility and uselessness is death. So when a person says, I can't, that is evil. That's Ra. Right? That's negative. I can't. We shouldn't try. That's futility. It's evil. The story of the spies, right, Professor? The story of the spies is that Moses sent them to devise a strategy about how we would conquer the land. So tell us about its terrain. Tell us about the features of the land. Tell us about the people that live there and how they organize themselves so that we can devise a strategy, right? And they come back and they give a report on the terrain and on the people. And then they conclude by saying, Lo nuchal, we cannot manage, we cannot succeed in conquering it, right?
Is Joshua part of them? Or,
Joshua he's part of them, but he doesn't agree with the negative.
Do it doesn't. Joshua
12 spies,
and
right?
Caleb and Yefuneh were the two who came with positive, and the other 10 were negative.
Was the other one positive or just didn't say much of anything?
Well, let's see the text. Page 625, chapter 13, verse 30.
Page what? 6.
625, 13:30. And Kalev stilled the people toward Moses and said, "We should go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it."
So
But the
using
people-
Moses as neutral.
But the other men who went up with him said, verse 31, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." Yehoshua, verse 6, 14:6. Joshua and Kalev tore their clothing, and they said to all the congregation of Israel, saying, "The land which we passed through it to spy out is exceedingly good land. If the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land flowing with milk and honey." Only rebel not against God, and nor should you fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their defense is removed from over them, and the Lord is with us, fear them not. Right? So this is that's the spies.
Oh, they wanted to stone.
Yeah,
They wanted to stone these two.
they did. So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs points out a fascinating thing.
Wow, that's pretty heavy duty.
They were
Yeah,
angry, yes.
he says that in a sense, Moses chose, if you read the beginning, Moses chose these 12 spies because they are leaders of the congregation. They are all
Represent.
heads of the people, and they're people of great renown. And these were political leaders. And in a sense, Moshe chose them thinking that they would be ideal people because they can be relied upon for their wisdom and their insight and their influence. But in a sense, that same quality ended up becoming a negative. And the reason is because they had so much at stake in the status quo.
What was the status quo? Stay in the desert.
Living in the desert. Meaning they were successful in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only in that environment that they were anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Going into the land of Israel would mean a new way of being.
Mm-hmm.
And that's deeply frightening, even if that way of being is apparently better. But better is always harder. I would say
A challenge.
different is always going to be less preferable to the status quo, regardless of how better or worse different is. And so these people had much to lose by going into the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They,
It was more personable. They were thinking a lot about themselves.
yes,
And also they were responsible for their own people.
they were. And so they were risk averse.
So this is not a question of a difference of opinion. I'm seeing this under. Let's have a rational debate here.
No.
There's I think I saw the word evil.
Well, they're basically saying you guys are ruining everything, is what the spies are saying to Yehoshua and Kalev.
Mm-hmm.
You're ruining everything. People are gonna die.
Mm-hmm.
And the nation will be obliterated. Everything, and that's true. Whether or not life as they know it
Mm-hmm.
would die.
Reality.
Right.
and the powers that be would be new powers, meaning because new environment and new circumstances would bring up new things. So I think that's one point. Another point is the difference between, and this is another thing he says, which caught my fascination, is the difference between having a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
In a what?
And a growth mindset.
Growth.
Meaning, if a person says, I am successful, I am talented, I am smart, which is how these people are referred to, then I will stay in the environment where I believe that I can put those skills to use. But if I believe I am a good learner, if I believe that I am resilient, if I believe that I am committed to growth, then it doesn't matter where I am. As a matter of fact, the more challenged I am, the more it brings out the best in me.
I thrive.
Right? And this is brought out specifically in the two people, Yehoshua and Kalev. Yehoshua is prayerful. Vayikra Moshe leHoshea binun Yehoshua, says Reb Nachman. Hoshea means save me. Yehoshua means God saves. When somebody calls out, save me, when somebody prays, that itself is the salvation, living a prayerful mind. And remember, we talked about the idea that prayer is not about accomplishing the artful reading of Hebrew words. Prayer is about working to carve out the awareness of God in my life. And that specifically comes from adversity. It comes from adversity that when I am in a pinch, I turn to God in prayer. And when people disturb me in my prayer, I still and silence the indignant voice in my head that says, how dare you get in my way? And that's important. That's the most important part of prayer, is silencing the indignant voice that judges the person next to me. So that's the prayerfulness of Yehoshua. That means that he is somebody who is growing from adversity and is turning his challenge into awareness of God. And Kalev is a descendant of Yehuda, who is the greatest of growth mindsets. He's the Baal Teshuvah, who turned his life around many times over. He's the story of Yehuda is a story of failure upon failure, both with his fall with Tamar, as well as with his selling his brother into slavery. And then he turns around in both of those cases and turns his life around. And so this is the idea of a person who doesn't see himself as a talented, skilled person who succeeds. He sees himself as a person who learns and grows and is resilient. And thus, going back to the Parsha of Tzitzis, that we say that I am not a slave to my circumstances. I can see God in my physical experience. I can see God in front of me always. In my life, God is in my life and is in the physical existence. It's in the momentary, it's in the imminent. It's in that which I'm holding in my hand. I can see God. And that I am not a slave to my circumstance. I am called to serve. I have the freedom to make choices. I can overcome my circumstances. And finally, that I am here to direct worshipfulness to God and that I should recognize that my life is a service of God, and that and so again, that's not about, these are all not statements of accomplishment. These are all statements of journey. And so when we live in an accomplishment stage, then we're scared of leaving the status quo because this is the only place that we're going to accomplish. But if life is about journey, if life is about looking through and seeing beyond, then we want to go and see more things and new things. If we believe that we are not slaves to our circumstance, then we know that we're going to be able to have, it's going to be about making choices, and every circumstance is going to provide new choices for us to make. And we're going to be making those choices. And if life is about worshipfulness, then it doesn't matter where we are. It matters that we go and we worship. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me. And seid gesund, a gute Woche.
A gute Woche.
Thank you.
Thank you.